A treasure has been found in this field, or rather this tell, an archaeological mound dating back nearly 3,000 years. However, so far hardly anybody seems to care about one of the greatest discoveries. I'm talking about a biblical treasure atop Tel Rehov in the northern Jordan Valley. Join me in climbing the tell, and as Yeshua said in the parable, the kingdom of heaven is like a treasure hidden in a field, which a man found and hid, and for joy over it, he goes and sells all that he has and buys the field. I'll give you a hint. The biblical treasure has to do with the two great prophets, Elijah and Elisha. Tel Rehov is in the middle of their ancient stomping grounds, covering the agricultural area that stretches from the Jordan River all the way to Mount Carmel. To the north is the city of Beit Shan, and to the west is Mount Gilboa, to the east the Jordan River, and to the south Jericho. But it's exciting to know, down by the Jordan River, that the prophet Elijah spoke to Elisha, his disciple, and he said these words, "Ask what I may do for you before I am taken away from you." And Elisha said, "Please, let a double portion of your spirit be upon me." So it happened that they continued on and talked, and then suddenly a chariot of fire appeared with horses of fire and separated the two of them, and Elijah went up by a whirlwind into heaven. And Elisha was witness to this event, which confirmed that he would indeed receive the second double portion. And so when the sons of the prophets who were from Jericho saw him, they said, "The spirit of Elijah rests on Elisha." And they came to meet him and bowed to the ground before him. And they said to him, "Look now, there are 50 strong men with your servants." Here at Tel Rehov, archaeologists uncovered a compound just behind me that suggests that Elisha the prophet actually had his residence here and possibly his prophetic headquarters. Come on, let's go check it out. As we check out what could well be a school of the prophets, we're of course going to see what the site looks like today, but also compare it to video footage taken at the end of years of archaeological excavations. The digs culminated in July 2012 under Amichai Mazar of the Hebrew University. It's a lot easier walking down the mound than going up it. So we're here to try and discover what life might have been with Elisha and the prophets. Come on. One would think that the world media would rush here to Tel Rehov in droves to report this exciting discovery. But so far, only my friend Chris Mitchell from CBN News has covered this story for the 700 Club. This site yielded 5 or 6 clues that were circumstantial each on its own, but together actually put together a beautiful picture of the possibility that this indeed was the home of Elisha. The first element that links this site back to Elisha is the dating of the compound, which leads us to the second half of the 9th century BC, exactly the time, the era when Elisha lived. In this room, a second element was discovered in what very likely could have been Elisha's bedroom because of this platform area where he might easily have rested his head at night to sleep. They found a pottery shard, something like this, but of course much bigger, that was broken, and as they pieced it back together, it gave them the name Elisha. The third element is found in 1 Kings 19:16, where in the second part of the verse it says, "And Elisha, the son of Shaphat of Abel-Mecholah, you shall anoint as prophet in your place." Now, Abel-Mecholah is about 10 kilometers away from here. And it would have made complete sense for Elisha to make this his stomping grounds, because about 20 kilometers away in this direction, he would stop off at Shunem, where he had an upper room, and then about 40 kilometers away from this residence is Mount Carmel. What an ideal location for him to walk and to go to and from. The fourth exciting element found at this compound brings us back again to the scripture 1 Kings 19:16, where it says, "Also you shall anoint Jehu the son of Nimshi as king over Israel." An additional pottery shard was found at this place with the name Nimshi on it, which also links us back to the biblical account of the relationship between Elijah the prophet and Elisha. Just outside of what could have been Elisha's room, 2 incense altars were found. And that says to us that this place had some spiritual significance in the life of whoever lived here. That is the 5th element. The 6th element is this room, where benches were found all along the walls. A very possible place where Elisha sat together with the sons of the prophets, like a mini congregation together. When you take these 6 pieces of evidence or clues and weave them together, it gives us a beautiful picture that Elisha and the sons of the prophets gathered together here. This plaster on the wall is over 2,800 years old, and it's deteriorating quickly. I feel in my heart that we must do something to restore and to preserve this site. Let me tell you a beautiful story in Scripture back in 2 Kings chapter 5, which possibly could have taken place at this compound. For it tells us about a Syrian army general named Naaman who has leprosy. And his Israeli slave servant girl says to him, "If only you got to the prophet Elisha, you could be healed." So hearing this, Naaman sets out from Syria and comes to the doorway of the house here of the compound. And he meets one named Gehazi, who meets him at the door and maybe into the reception room. But Elijah doesn't come out. Gehazi runs back to Elisha and he says, "Elisha," he says, "come out, for there's a Syrian army general who's actually one of the enemies of Israel, one of the big enemies of Israel." And Elisha sends Gehazi back from his room and he says, "Go tell the Syrian army general, Naaman, to go dip himself 7 times in the Jordan," which is back this way. So now Naaman hears these words from Gehazi, "Go dip yourself in the Jordan," and he's furious because the Jordan, a little river, like what's so special about it? It's not the Mississippi. And so he says to himself and his officers, "Man, we could have gone back to Syria and dipped ourselves in the mighty rivers there." So Naaman figures out, we've come this far, so let's go down to the Jordan and I'll try it. And he dips himself 7 times in the Jordan and he's healed of leprosy. Now he comes back to give thanks to Elisha, and Elisha says, "No, in other words, we will give glory to God. Let him go and be blessed." So General Naaman of the Syrian army, leaving being blessed, being delivered from leprosy through the healing powers that God had gifted through Elisha, he sets out with his 4x4 chariot and his officers and heads back probably towards Syria. But Gehazi has greed that enters his heart, and realizing that he's gonna go without any riches or any payment, runs down the hill, stops the Syrian general, and he says to Naaman, "Look, there are a couple prophets coming down from Bethel, and they do need some things, so I'll be glad to take the financial gifts that you have brought to us here." And so he takes those gifts without Elisha knowing anything about it. Gehazi comes back to the house, and at some point, very possibly in this meeting room, Elisha comes out and says, "Gehazi, what have you done? Where have you been?" And then, of course, because of it, a curse comes upon Gehazi and leprosy falls upon him. This archaeological site at Tel Rehov is a biblical treasure. If you're interested in the preservation of this site, please feel free to write us and we'll send you more information. The Work of Vision for Israel is a faith-friendly compassionate work to reach out to those who don't have so much in life.
So in 1994, a lot of immigrants coming to Israel, and we have established a charity called Vision for Israel. And then in 1996, there were a lot of terror attacks happening in bus bombings and bus explosions with suicide bombers. And our lives completely changed from that time. And we've decided we're going to go visit these terror victims' families and try and help them. From that, the word just came out and people heard that we're helping the terror victims. And we started getting containers of humanitarian aid to Israel. This work just grew and grew beyond our imagination or our expectations. This is the Millennium Center, and this is the House of Vision for Israel, and this place is a lighthouse. We wanted to bring light into people's lives, and we feel like we're fulfilling that. After helping close to 1 million people in Israel, including terror victims, lone soldiers, children at risk, and a lot of poor and needy families.
Our hope for the future is that we will be able to reach through the generations, reach through all age levels, and reach many millions more with assistance, aid, education, and in any way possible that we can extend ourselves.
It's not about what we are getting out of this life and how much pleasure we have. It is about what we invest in other people's lives. That's what really is the bottom line of satisfaction.
This place is not only a lighthouse, but a place of refuge. We should be able to open up our doors to the community around us and make a difference in their lives, not only now, but in the next and coming generations. As you partake and join together with us, linking our hands and our arms together, doing the work for those who are in great need, we will all be blessed, and it will become a privilege to partake of this great work. So we invite all of you to come alongside of us, come here to Israel, and let's do something good for the rest of the world. Climbing tells always makes me hungry. So let's stop off in an Arab village for some bread, and our word of the week, lechem, bread. Elijah and Elisha ate lechem. Though today it's mass-produced by machines, we'll still have to wait, just like Elijah did for the widow of Zarephath to make his bread or pita. Really, pita is just another form of the word lechem, which is bread. But this is the Middle Eastern bread that most people, in fact, I love to eat. Lechem in Hebrew, which is bread, or chobez in Arabic, has been a staple food for millennia in the Middle East. Now, is this what they mean by manna from heaven? Lechem, bread. The prophets ate it, and so can we. One for you, and one for me. Back in Jerusalem, I meet up with Dr. Stephen Fawn, founder and president of the University of the Holy Land. He has lived in Israel for over 30 years, being one of the editors of the Dead Sea Scrolls, calling for the preservation of the site at Tel Rehov.
Tel Rehov stood unexcavated for all this time up until now. Ami Chaim Azar, professor from Hebrew University, had in mind after he was working at Tel Bet Shan to come to the largest tell that was in the area. It was only less than 5 miles away. He excavated up on the upper tell, on the lower tell, cut trenches, and in the last season of excavation, after discovering beehives from the time of 10th century and ostraca with the name Nimshi on it, which is the clan that was, of course, Jehu was part of. Very appropriate for the site. It was exciting enough, but when he was looking to see whether the beehives were going off to the east and see how far the extent was, he dug down into a house, and lo and behold, there were incense altars in there.
So let me just bring it to this point. So Avichai Mazar, basically he was excavating because it was a tell, a mound, without necessarily knowing that anything would be there?
Well, he knew from the original pottery that was on the surface that there was some earlier Iron Age type remains from the time of David and Solomon, the time of Elijah and Elisha and Jehu. I mean, this is all part of this period, and he knew that it was there. What he liked was that those remains laid right below the surface, so he didn't have to go through a lot of other material to get to it.
It's interesting how history, such valuable history, is not so far away from us, actually.
No, it could be that Jesus and the apostles could have walked right over the top of this. But the fact is that it took 3 millennia for this to be unearthed again for us to see.
Okay, now I've got it up to that point. So then he's gotten to the point of the beehives, which then leads him to another structure being a home of sorts.
Right. As he was digging down, he came upon, first of all, what was obviously what they consider to be cultic material, a couple of incense altars, but without any figurines on it. They found also rooms that were benched all around, and 2 wings of a house that were actually together, these 2 large rooms that came together in the back only through a small room that actually had on top of a bed-like bench and a table next to it, an ostrakhan or a potsherd with red ochre pigment, the name Elisha. And what we're looking at here is something that is either the prophet himself, because this is the house of a holy man, only 7 miles away from where he was born, or it's the best model that we have for a holy man during that period. This name, it's in red. It's got a very thick layer of ink on it.
Mm-hmm. So does this say the name Elisha here?
Right. This is the bottom of an aleph. It can't really be anything else from that period. This is a broken lamed here, and so we have a little bit of a right about in here. You can see where it looks like it's broken. Did the staff go up like it should if it's really a lamed? Well, we did some more with polarizing filters. And you can see here that right where that lamed comes up, that it goes through this thick layer of gray slip here. And that the red would have continued right up from there. So confirming that was truly a lamed there. So we really do have Elisha is the name of the person that's on this.
So Elisha, whom most Westerners call, or Elisha as is written in Hebrew, was that a common name then, or?
Elisha was around. There's about 9 different places in the first millennium where that's found. About 4 or 5 of them are from over in Ammon. It exists, but it's not a common name. And it's the only evidence of the name being used in the 9th century when Elisha the prophet lived.
So the actual translation...
It's like a placard, that's what it is.
Yeah, really.
This place belongs to Elisha or whatever.
So maybe it was like a door panel or something.
You could come up with all kinds of ideas. We can't know for sure, but it took a lot of work to try to make this so that you had a thick gray slip going across the surface, and then impregnated down into it would be the actual red ink. But alongside this, there were other ostraca and parts of jars that had the name Nimshi. So the family of Nimshi had an influence here, where they had their own jars with commodities. And it's, according to Professor Mazar, he believes that they were a very influential clan, if not the influential clan, in the Bet Shan Valley, heading off in the direction of Jezreel. Professor Mazar says it's very tempting to say that this is the Elisha the prophet, but how can you really absolutely say for sure? It has a lot of items here that are consistent with the life and the times of Elisha the prophet. And from a certain standpoint of a scholar, they have to be really careful about suddenly taking any story and nailing it down in the Bible somewhere. It's called biblicizing. And so there's a lot of care has to be done. So you can say, some might say that this is compelling. it's safer to say this is consistent with the life and times and the practice of a holy man. Another Elisha the prophet, perhaps, another holy man by the name of Elisha, or of Elisha himself. But it's worthy of protection. It's worthy of leaving for other people to see whether one wants to take one side or the other on this question. How far can we be certain? We can at least say that it's consistent and it's the only witness to a room and a house associated with a holy man from that period that we have anywhere. Those are incense altars, yeah. These two, right here and here. And then over here you had an oven. This is the entrance into the room. This is the bed.
Of Elisha?
Of Elisha. There were lamps found inside this room as well.
Okay.
And this is another room. These are two rooms where you have benches where numbers of people will sit.
Okay, now I remember it, standing here.
Right.
Going here, possibly a guest quarter or Gehazi's room.
Right.
Elisha's room back here, the thing that's kind of falling apart
the servant, here. Yeah, the servant would actually take an offering. People here are more intimate with the prophet because of the fact that they have direct access. And here you have an oven for food because you have to feed these people as well. But then you have over here a place where people can come and they don't get to come in to see him.
I understand. And this is an altar of incense.
Yeah.
And that's another altar of incense.
This is an offering to God, and this is an offering to the prophets. They found a whole bin of grain there.
Really?
And remember the guy coming out from Baal Shalisha, where he comes out and he gives them some grain and some bread, and they have the multiplication of the loaves. It was always something to give. I mean, the Shunammite woman gave him bread. Elijah was asking for everything that was left in the Syrophoenician woman's cruse of oil and also the grain. And it's that kind of provision that sometimes sparks the miracle that follows.
Oftentimes miracles followed when people brought a sacrifice or brought a form of provision to honor God's messenger or the prophet or whoever.
Yeah, and in a way it wasn't that Elijah was being selfish. He just knew what it took for that bridge to be made.
Almost a key to open the door of faith.
Yeah, and by providing it opens up the door of provision, you see.
Interesting.
And you see this throughout all the narratives. And when they talk about food being given to Elisha, the word lechem is being used there. Now, sometimes that's used for meat and other things, but it just basically means provision. What we have here is provision of grain. And so then they had an oven here. The prophets and disciples could be sitting around eating together. They could be learning together.
So this room, these would be both meeting rooms, and this room was more intimate to the access to the prophet Elisha himself, or Elisha. And then this would have been additional students maybe that were studying, almost like a yeshiva, coming, talking here a little bit. Or if they needed the space, they had two classrooms, actually.
Well, let's take it from the standpoint of the school of the prophets. He sometimes had 50 or even 150 per city, it seems to be the key, that he would have following him around. And he had to disciple them at the same time. We can recreate 3 or 4 major scenarios from this one site that we have here. One is the setting, being a place where the disciples of this obviously important holy man here, by the name of Elisha, who would be nourished by him, who would receive provision from others, who would be given a setting here to be able to disciple, to pray, various things that could be done for his group. But it's set up in a way in which the one wing of the house, the benches, has also more direct access, but they have to give incense to God. The other side, where as a group, they have to give not just incense to God, they have to give also provision for the prophet. And this gives more of a picture of what's happening when they're not in session, and that is people coming and waiting with supplications to the holy man, to the man of God. And so he might give them prayer, he might give them healing. There may be a number of things that happen through this, but this would be kind of like a waiting room in some ways. So those are two scenarios for the use of this place, besides it being the place where Elisha himself would live and obviously pray. There's the back of the bed here where he could actually just sit and to read, if he had, with a place where there were actually shards of the lamp that were found in here.
The actual place for the lamp was found in this region.
This actually continues up, but this is unusual for a bench to actually have this sloped back on it. And the lamp could have been up here. The lamp also could have been on the table. See, this is a podium that is right next to the larger couch or bed. And that's also where the name plaque with Elijah's name was found on it. It was right over here.
That's amazing. What can be done to maintain this site and restore it to its significance?
Well, first of all, it takes a little bit of the bread of a different type for people to invest in this, because even though the walls are still standing, little by little the weather is taking the plaster away. Birds are drilling holes in the wall,
yeah,
and parts of it are collapsing. And it's becoming, these squared edges are becoming rounder. But by the hands of just really gifted conservationists, they can actually bring it back to what it originally was. And this is something that we would like to see available for people from all around the world, Christians and Jews alike, to come back and appreciate something that will remind them of those biblical stories that mean so much to them. And this is the first place where you actually can say this is a house of a holy man from the time of Elijah and Elisha. This is a place that might have been the house of Elisha himself, perhaps even Elijah before him, who Elisha inherited the ministry from. We have to find the resources to be able to conserve and then do some restoration of this house so that people, when they come to visit the land, can see the place where certainly a prophet of God, if not Elisha himself, once served the Lord.